So now we have created the graph, we understand its dimensions, so we have to talk about reading the graph. Okay, so reading the graph means understanding what we see when we see it in a graph. So, for example, identify the following. Population. The population is the group that was evaluated. So in this case, the population would be 1A students. Identify the variable. The variable is the thing that was being asked. So in this case, pastimes. Identify the type of variable. So it's not numbers, it's words that explain a quality, and therefore it's qualitative. Identify the variable with the most students or the most popular, and that would be exercise, because it has the highest bar. You could also ask the difference between the most and the least. So we know already that the most is our exercise, so that would be 10. But now we have to identify our least. Well, our least is our smallest bar. In this case, it would be arts and crafts. So we have 10 minus the least, which is 1 for arts and crafts, and that would give us 9 students, because of course it's students that are being discussed here. Or something like identify the number of students that chose reading or baking. So when we're talking about an or, that's an addition situation. I have reading here, and I have baking here. So I add them together. My reading was 4, my baking was 2, based on my columns. And so the amount of students together would be 6 students. The last topic is a double bar graph. And a double bar graph is the same thing as a bar graph. So it has the same components. But it compares 2 sets of raw instructions. And it usually has a legend to let you know what's what. So if we're going to use the information that we already have, but include, for example, 1C, then we're going to use the graph that we already have as a base and then add to it. So let's say instead of this being the frequency, it's the frequency for 1A, but there's another frequency for 1C. And let's put some numbers in there. 9 for TV, 2 for video games, 5 for reading, 0 for arts and crafts, 6 for social media, 4 for exercise, and 5 for baking, for a total of 31. Okay. So a double bar graph looks basically the same as a regular bar graph, except it's going to have 2 bars next to each other. And it's going to have a legend. So the legend usually appears on the side, and it tells you what each is. So we're going to have 1 box for 1A and 1 box for 1C. And for example, it might have a color to it. It could also have stripes or patterns or anything to identify one versus the other. So let's say that 1C is going to be in red. Okay, so then using a similar method, we're going to put in the 1C information. Now normally this would have been done before. Normally you'd be able to space things out better because you'd be doing all of it at the same time, but we're just adding on, so it's not going to be perfect, but the idea will be clear. So frequency for 1C is 9. For TV, it's 2. For video games, it's 5. For reading, it's nothing for arts and crafts. So you can just have a little line on the actual horizontal base to show that there isn't anything there, because it's perfectly valid that no one picked it. Social media is 6. Exercise is only 4. And baking is 5. Okay, and then again, these would be marked in red. Okay, and so now you have 2 sets of data represented in the same graph. You can see the differences in the class without having to make a whole second graph, because you have right at your fingertips not only how many students are in general, but also a comparison between them in terms of the specific pastime choices. And this is an option rather than trying to look back and forth between 2 graphs to show very similar data collected in the same way, but reflecting the differences between 2 groups.